morning. Welcome to my Compound Life. I'm Jonathan. Thanks for watching the video. It is the 14th of November morning, pretty early morning. Rather grim today, exactly reflected by the British weather. So Bitcoin down, all of the equity, stocks and shares down. Pretty grim, but I think it's also have a level of expectation, because there will always be like the buy the rumor, sell the news, right? Essentially means, we spoke about a few factors that are causing Bitcoin and the equity market to be suppressed. Well, mainly Bitcoin, because equity market were performing ultra well last week, especially towards the end of the week, right? So even until Monday and Tuesday, something like Tesla, the Nvidia, they're performing extremely well. However, it was just Bitcoin and crypto that were pretty much suppressed. So as mentioned before, it was due to government shutdown. There were a lot of uncertainty, a lot of people not getting paid. A lot of money in the government's checking account were being delayed. Hence, the markets reacting pretty badly. Okay. So as soon as we learn about the ending of the government shutdown, okay, so there has been a small rally in terms of Bitcoin. I think it somehow managed to rally until about 104, 105, or even 106,000 USD, right? It was temporary, right? Essentially because it was all due to buy the rumor, sell the news, right? There was a lot of assumption, I think, towards Sunday that says government will be reopening, so that's why Bitcoin and crypto pumped a little bit, right? So as soon as the government shutdown were called off, and that was signed by President Donald Trump, all respect, people started to sell off, right?
In 500 feet, turn right onto Pershing Road. Then turn left.
There's a
onto
good reason for
Road.
that, right? Because there are people that still believe in the 4-year cycle for Bitcoin. Does make sense for them to de-risk, because from early October to December, if you still follow the 4 years Bitcoin cycle, essentially that means time to sell, right? Because Bitcoin will peak, okay? But of course, there are analysts that said, this time round it's different. Bitcoin will not follow through the 4-year cycle anymore, because of the big institutions' adoption, right? Like the ETF, US Bitcoin ETF. In the UK, we have Bitcoin ETP that are beginning to roll out. Institutions continue to buy, right? Like the Bitcoin miners, or strategy, or in many cases there are a lot more countries, sovereign wealth, that are dipping their toes into buying Bitcoin, right? So there are many that still believe that this cycle, it's totally different, right? But the fact that there's still many, mainly the Bitcoin OG, right? Like the original holders that bought Bitcoin at very, very, very low price. For them, it does make sense to de-risk, right? So that's when we still anticipate for more sell-off, maybe until December, right? But that's fine, because if we have conviction on Bitcoin, if we know that Bitcoin now is about 2 trillion
Now turn left onto
market
Ribbledale
cap,
Road.
right? If we believe Bitcoin is a 2 trillion market cap, and then eventually getting into 4 trillion, right? Or it will eventually replace gold. So gold has a market cap of 20 trillion, I believe, right? So imagine if Bitcoin starts to have gold's, shave some of gold's market cap, there would still be more rooms for Bitcoin to grow, right? So bear that in mind. There's a lot of market uncertainty, right now, because, of course, due to the government shutdown, there are a lot of data unclarity or data blackout that are affecting government's decision, like the Fed's decision, right? I think in the poly market, it came out to about 50%. It dropped down from, I think, 96% for Fed's rate cut in December. And now it's about 50% or less. Okay, so that's not good. So there are a lot of uncertainty that the rate cut might not even be coming, right? So there's a lot of expectation that Jerome Powell, the US Fed, will eventually talk about a possible rate cut. And if there's a rate cut coming, it's gonna have quantitative easing, and essentially it's gonna rally like the growth stocks or even Bitcoin. Okay. And of course, there are market uncertainty. Bond market are flashing a major warning, right? Corporate bonds are essentially the ones tied to AI companies are getting dumped aggressively, right? So I think AI companies, they are getting a little bit screwed over too, right? There's a lot of speculation that AI could be a bubble, resulting that people starts to sell off, right? Because of course a lot of the AI companies have rallied tremendously, right, over the past year, right? So some believe it's a bubble, and some are just want to de-risk. Hang on, a lot of cars. Okay, so I think taking all of these factors into consideration, right? Here are a few scenarios, right? Of course, personally, right, I still hold majority of my Bitcoin, and I'm not gonna sell right now. It's not the right time. It's about $98,000 per Bitcoin. At the peak, it was 126, right? We spoke about selling off Bitcoin at that peak, like de-risking, taking, preserving capital, taking profits off the table at that peak time, right? And even until about 116,000 USD, I'm still talking about taking profit, right? But for me now, I'm not taking profit, right? Although my Bitcoin average is low, I think it still makes sense because I've got strong conviction on the asset. It makes sense for me to hold on to it longer, right? Because I've taken enough profit that I can get by, right? So by the way, I'm kind of retired. I do do some side hustle every now and then, but I don't really need a real job to survive, right? So for now, rather than taking profit, I'm actually buying every now and then. Every now and then, whenever there's a good dip, I'll buy. But at the same time, to highlight to you, I only buy with spare cash, right? So certainly every time I took profit, I'll take tax into consideration, stash away half of that for in case of tax purpose, because we have to pay for tax in the UK. But at the same time, if you need that money for whatever reason, like for me, paying off mortgages, paying off this and that, kids' tuition, badminton, and so forth, right? Makes sense for you to set aside that money and only buy with some of that disposable income. I say some, not all, because you don't want to go all in right now, right? Because no one knows whether are we still in a bull market, right? According to a lot of analysts, we are still in a bull market. However, for some analysts that highly believe on the 4 years Bitcoin cycle, right? They believe after December, we are heading towards a bear market, right? So even if we do head down to a bear market, Bitcoin at $98,000, still pretty cheap, right? And so if you're someone like me that bought Bitcoin much earlier, the best thing to do right now is to hold or to hodl, right? Hold on to dear life, right? Now is not the time to sell unless you need to pay off something, right? Unless you really need that cash, then yes, sell a little bit of gradually, right? If you're kind of new to Bitcoin, you heard about it during the last media coverage, during when Bitcoin was at its high, a lot of media covered it, and you're kind of deciding whether you want to, is it time to get in, right? And in that case, maybe now's a good time to get in, right? But don't all lump sum in, right? Because I mentioned the uncertainty. Will it go up even further? I think a lot of analysts believe it might do. I kind of felt the probability it's half now, right? Or 60-40, that 60% it actually might go into a bear market as opposed to going up more, right? So it might make sense to dollar cost average or pound cost average to slowly and buy into Bitcoin, right? But certainly for me to hodl, because if there's still that 40% chance that it might go up higher, as a lot of analysts believe that Bitcoin follows the liquidity, global liquidity, right? And quantitative easing in the US, the stimulus check that President Donald Trump promised, might bring Bitcoin higher, right? So yeah, I think that's to bear in mind, to hodl now. And for the newbies into Bitcoin, yes, I think it would be a good time to pound cost average and buy some. There's a possibility that Bitcoin will drop even further. I think in my last video I've covered a little bit about the possible of Bitcoin death cross forming, right? So if you historically look through the death cross, every time death cross form, Bitcoin will dip even further a little bit, and then hopefully after a couple of days it rebounds, right? So that's very important to take into consideration. It certainly will rebound, but at the same time, the last death cross form, it took about 6 weeks to get back to a golden cross. That's when Bitcoin actually formed another all-time high, right? However, I've also looked through some of the historical death cross performance, right? Obviously, in the last bear market, when death cross formed, it took essentially a year and more for it to get back into golden cross, and of course eventually it gets into another all-time high, right? So that's the risk of holding, right? So the risk can be, it takes some time for us to get back. However, I'm treating Bitcoin like a bank, like a little bank of mine, where I'm storing a little bit of wealth in my Bitcoin. So that's why I'm not too worried or too concerned, and that's something we all should apply. So bear in mind, death cross will be forming pretty soon. In last video I've mentioned about death cross happening sometime in the middle of November. Yes, that will definitely appear, and it's not all doom and gloom. If we are still in a bull market, essentially give it about 5-6 weeks, we'll get out of it, we'll get back into the golden cross, and we'll form another all-time high, right? So that was based on the last death cross performance. So that's when death cross, FYI, is when the 50 weeks moving average moved below the 200 weeks moving average, right? And it's not the end of the world. I think treat this as an opportunity to stack more. Don't get frightened out. It's probably the best time not to be fearful, right? For us investors, it's time to be greedy, but of course don't get too greedy, because what if Bitcoin might fall further, right? So bear that in mind. The best way to buy, it's always pound cost average or dollar cost average. That's it what I want to talk about today. Thanks for watching. I will try to be always here. That's how I roll. Oh, actually Bitcoin is at 96,000. I think it will definitely fall further when the US market open. So don't worry about this too much, as it's still a very, very strong asset, and we simply need to keep on stacking. Okay, so thanks for watching. Hit the like, hit the subscribe if you like the content. Well, even if you don't like the content, just help me out. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video, right? So thanks for watching My Compound Life. I'm Jonathan, your host, and I'll be creating more of such videos soon to talk about my investment journey. So I'm not an expert investor, but I did do well enough that I can get into a slightly earlier retirement, right? And of course, I don't talk about Bitcoin all the time. You might see a lot more Bitcoin video because there's more content to talk about. However, my investment journey, I've gone into properties at a very earlier stage. I got into stocks and shares, ETF, and of course, I think what really made me life-changing wealth or decision, giving me the full-on decision to get into an early retirement is actually my investment in Bitcoin, which I believe many of you should consider, right? So this is my third Bitcoin cycle, which is also a more disappointing one, but I've made enough mistake that I believe I don't want more of you guys to make that mistake, right? And I want more of us to preserve capital when it's the time to preserve, and to be greedy when it's the time to be greedy too, right? So yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do on all of my video. And thanks for watching. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and thank you. I'll see you soon. Bye.